Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Good morning.
It's pretty early. As Don mentioned, my name is Sean Busbey. I am a software engineer at Cloudera.
And I'm Josh, technically a member of the professional staff, but you can call me a developer.
And this talk is about you all, the community for Accumulo.
So you know why we're all here, right? We're here because of this nice little project called Apache Accumulo. And if you came for Buzzword Bingo today, congratulations, we have some for you. Apache Accumulo is a Java-based project that uses Hadoop Zookeeper to build a fault-tolerant distributed database. It's based off of Google's Big Table, has some novel features such as cell-level security, and a little concept we like to call iterators. And I think I hit all of that.
And hopefully you already knew all of that or you're at the wrong conference.
There will be remedial detention afterwards.
So the part we're going to talk about is the ASF that's right underneath Hadoop. That's the Apache Software Foundation. Now, you might have started with Accumulo when it started, back in 2008-ish. But September 12th, 2011 is when it moved into the Apache Software Foundation in incubation. So that's been 1,004 days, in case you're counting, and I am. So how are we doing? What's happened?
Overall, you can see we have two graphs here. On the top, this is commits over time to the repository, and on the bottom, it's lines of code changed, going up in the green, and lines of code removed, going down in the red. You can see overall, we've actually done pretty good. We've always had a steady collection of commits coming in. Over the past year or so, we've seen a much bigger volume coming through, which is great. You can also see down at the bottom, like any other project, we have our big refactorings. We have the days where Eric Newton decided he wanted to rewrite everything, or Keith did the same, and we have as much code deleted as we have inserted.
But as far as the Apache Software Foundation is concerned, this is all kind of incidental. The thing that they care about are these principles and these tenets.
The really big thing that we have to consider is that Apache Accumulo, while it is this project that's made up essentially by all these separate people, we do have these guidelines that we have to follow being an Apache project that are set forth by the foundation. The tenets of these are really broken down in what's called the Apache way. And the key points here are the fact that community, not just the product that you're shipping, isn't really important. The project should be open. We should not be holding it back from anyone. Anyone who wants to participate can do so. And we want to make sure that we're doing this for the greater good of everyone.
So one of these very important tenets, and the one we're really focused on today, is this notion of community over code. And the idea is that long-term, for a project to survive, what you need is a sustainable community that can refresh itself. Because otherwise, what you end up with is a reliance on a particular code cowboy, or you end up with a reliance on a particular employer, and eventually there's nothing to stop one day the rug just coming out from underneath your users. So how can we look at this community part? This is the chart of Google Analytics unique users to the accumulo.apache.org website since we started existing. We could give a presentation about those interesting little spikes and what they mean, or you could guess what they are, and you'd probably be correct. I was surprisingly correct. But this isn't about the community. This is about outside interest in the community. So after teasing you with one chart, I'm not gonna show it anymore. So let's go back to entering the incubator. Apache already has a notion of how to measure that the community is growing and healthy and is safe to leave the incubator to go off on its own.
What this really boils down to is the foundation. Well, go back. The incubator is consider this sort of a meta project of the software foundation as a whole. Their goal is to make sure that a group of individuals is meeting the requirements that they set forth, and essentially, can you self-govern yourself? Are you being sustainable? Are you following the ways that were set forth by the foundation? What this really boils down into for graduating from incubation out to a top-level project is a couple things. One of them is that you want to make sure that your project name is actually recognizable. So when somebody says Accumulo, do they actually know what you mean? Do they know that this is a distributed database built on top of Hadoop? Another key point is that you can actually release the code that you're working on. So this is surprisingly more difficult than it sounds. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to make a tarball and throw it up. There's actually a lot of very critical steps that you have to follow. A lot of it actually stemming from legal reasons of how the foundation is actually organized. The other key tenet that is always a challenge to deal with is being able to have respectful disagreements. We don't have this problem usually.
Now, if you're familiar at all with our mailing list, we have a disagreement down pat. We are not afraid to share our opinions with each other.
It is literally hugging via email.
But that's an important skill to garner in a community, because if you can't disagree that way, then what you end up with is sort of slowly boiling over tensions, and over time destroyed relationships, and then projects explode.
So the other two aspects kind of revolve around this community aspect again. Like what Sean was saying earlier, we don't want reliance on a single individual or some single company to define the project as a whole. So what that really means is that we need to have people, fresh people coming into the project, and we need to foster this and encourage them to step up and get involved. So it's very important that we can both build committers and also, or we can encourage people to contribute, and we can encourage those contributors to move up into being committer status, where they can modify the repository and they can be a part of the project.
So here's where we started 1,004 days ago. We had 7 committers, many of whom are in this room right now. Thank you. They came from 4 employers who were not going to list because I had to do more paperwork if I did that.
Today, we're actually up to 20 committers, and surprisingly from 12 different employees. And for those who are really good at math, that is a 3 times growth on both aspects. So we've tripled the amount of people who we have actively taking a big role in the project, as well as the distribution of those across different employers.
Fortunately for you, this is not a 5-minute keynote, or we'd be done. So we have some more to show you because we have time. So now we're going to start doing charts, because charts are fun. So one of the tenets of the ASF we mentioned before was openness. And this is the idea that all of your discussion is supposed to happen out in a place where anyone can participate. Conveniently, this means that we have mailing lists that we can measure activity on to see how the community is going. These 2 charts are not actually useful. These are the number of messages on the user list in orange and the development list in blue. And while I do find it interesting that we have far more traffic on the developer list than the user list, I don't find that very surprising, because a lot of our users don't send emails on the internet to open public places where anybody can see them. So instead, we're going to look at the number of participants. So this is a proxy, to be sure, because again, a lot of our users aren't going to show up. But these are the number of unique voices. This is the user list. And there's a lot of noise here, and I'm sorry that I didn't have time to draw you a trend line or some other nicety. But you can see there's a general uphill climb within that noise. And it's unfortunate for our desire to have new, exciting information. It's about 3 times, like the committer and the employer chart was.
So we can look at the same sort of trend, the number of unique users who are hitting the developer list. As Sean was saying earlier, this tends to be a little higher, but we still have the same spikiness in which people come around, they ask some questions, they get involved, they might go away for a while, but they tend to come back. And overall, that trend line is still sloping up. So we have had increased growth with people who are actually concerned with development of Accumulo and maybe more advanced topics against Accumulo.
Now, I don't want to belabor this point, but this is another chart. This is the number of unique participants in our Jira. Jira is the main issue tracker we use to actually coordinate who's working on what on the project. And you can see the exact same pattern here. Now, our information doesn't go back as far, mostly because it was harder to go back farther, and as a good developer, I'm lazy. But you can see the same sort of trend. There's one place where this very clear 3x growth factor doesn't show up. This is unique authors in actual commits. Now, part of this is a problem with data. If you've done much work with Accumulo, you probably are aware that data in general is a terrible, dirty thing that you can't trust. So the story I want to tell with this chart is around the far right quarter of that chart. That's probably legitimate. That's when we were on Git, and we could actually distinguish between the author of some code and who pushed it into the repository. All this stuff to the left, that was back when we really couldn't make that distinguish. We couldn't distinguish that way. So you can see this big bump over on the far right. Some of that is because of that factor, but a lot of it actually isn't. And we can see this if we break it down sort of by showing the flow of participants between the different ways of communicating in the community. And what we really want to do is we want to draw people from the user list all the way through to making contributions. So this is the first month we have realistic data for. This is right after we switched to Git. What you see here is bars that represent the user list, the developer list, activity on Jira, and actually authoring commits. And those flows are the same person, right? So if Christopher Tubbs answers a question on the user list, and then he goes and talks about it on the developer list, and then he goes and makes a Jira, and then he pushes a patch, he ends up in all of those little flow bits. And what's nice here is that there's a very big band that goes from the user list over to Jira without going to the dev list. And those are users of Accumulo, I'll say. So these are people who aren't going to actually write code, but they tell us how we're doing things right or how we're doing things wrong. And the fact that they're actually participating in the Jira is really good, because that means instead of getting some short snippet of a message in an email and then the developer figuring out what the hell they're doing, they actually get to have a back and forth and end up with a commit there. This is the month that was our peak unique number of authors of commits, November 2013. What I find interesting here is that that percentage of users who are then going directly to Jira, it's way, way, way down. Depending on your familiarity with Accumulo history, this is shortly after the time when some different Hadoop vendors started announcing support for Accumulo. And I posit that this is mostly developer types coming in, and instead of going to the user list and saying, hey, here's what's broken, or here's what I need, and then transitioning into tickets or developer discussions, they go to the developer list and they say, hey, how can I help out? And then they go to Jira's and they do work. And then we end up with a big, giant line of people doing commits. Each of the last 3 months, the community has done a release, and that's really hard. And it's very good that you did that, so thank you. The chart for this transition, it looks the same on each of those 3 months, and it looks like this. It looks like a bunch of focus where almost everybody who participates on Jira ends up pushing a commit somewhere. And that's excellent. Well, for us, I mean, depends on how you like to spend your free time, I guess.
So what we can translate that to is we can start looking at the number of unique authors against commits, and we can actually overlay these on top of when major releases of Accumulo were actually released. We can see historically, going back those 3 years, we were doing regular releases about every 3 to 5 months or so on average. We had a couple times, once 1.4 came out, we started having, we had another bug fix on 1.3, so you see a little bit of overlap there. But we have a pretty straight trend going from a 1.4.0 to 1.5.0 and 1.4.4, as you see, and that was mid-2013 or so. We had this nice little spike in the middle there of commits, but we didn't actually do a release. And this goes back to what Sean was saying before about how this was about the same time that we had a bunch of new players coming in, these Hadoop vendors, and a lot more people getting involved. So while we had this lull in releases, what was really going on behind the scene is that we actually had 3 major branches of code that we were all working on together to try and get these out and release all these nice bug fixes and contributions that everyone has been making back to the users so they can actually benefit from this.
And that's a good example of why it's really important for us to keep growing you as the community, is that it's the amount of bandwidth we have as a group of developers. Like if we didn't have that big spike of new people in the middle there, those 1.4.5 or 1.5.1 releases, they probably wouldn't have happened right there, because the main core developers, their big concern was 1.6, because that's where a lot of the effort was going.
And the same sort of thing you can extrapolate from this. Going back to the Jira, so our issue tracking system, this is a line of how many issues that we've resolved. The big takeaway you can see there is this massive spike at the end there where we were closing a ton of issues all the time. And again, this goes back, is really a testament to the community who's getting involved, using the issue tracker for everyone else to get involved. Whoever actually is interested wants to be a part of it, wants to help contribute. This is really reflected here because it's that openness going out. Everyone can see what's going on. We can actually see progress being accomplished, and then we can verify that by the fact that we actually made some releases at the end. So to quantify that a little bit more, we tallied up some of the numbers of people who have contributed to the project, who have authored a commit, and who are actually committers and who have write access. And in this case for us, committers are also on the project management committee, which is typically it's a subset of the people who are committers of a project. For us, it's a one-to-one relationship. So those who are committers and commit to the code, they also are tasked with the overall guidance, making sure that the project is operating as according to how Apache sets forth. So overall, we've had about 65 people who are listed as contributors on our website, which is great. About 43 of those have actually submitted a patch to us and have some code in the repository in the history with their name on it. And again, about half of that, 20 people, are regularly working or have the ability to make these commits on their own. If you go outside and look at GitHub, which you could probably say is the most commonly used social coding website, you can do a general search, and we have actually over 100 repositories sitting out there that are in some way or another related to Accumulo. They're maybe using it, maybe it's a fork, maybe it's something integration with it. The cool part is that there's actually, this spans almost 10 different languages. It's not just Java, although that is the predominant, but there's some crazy stuff out there, like people using JavaScript. One was in Erlang, which surprised me. But it's really cool to see that we actually have, of these people who are contributing, we have a very diverse group of people who are actually making lots of different things. It's not just the same thing being recreated over and over again.
So we're not actually just here to show you charts. So you may have gotten the notion a couple of times that we want you to do something. We want you to get more involved. We want you to go from being our silent giant user base here to interacting on the user list, to helping people on the development list, to filing tickets, to making code. And I'm pretty sure the way to do that is not to show you terrible GNU plot charts. I'm pretty sure it's to show you cute pictures. So these adorable meerkats, they want you to go and email user and dev at accumulo.apache.org. because that's what really matters here today, is that you get more involved. Like, you're going to see a lot of talks about different integration efforts, and none of those would have been possible if the people involved didn't do more with the community. And it wouldn't have been possible without you as the community helping them along. We know it's hard to get started. We know that it can be scary to get out there in public, to, you're almost certainly going to make mistakes. That's the nature of software. And it can be embarrassing, but mistakes happen a lot.
We've all been there. Some days we're sitting there and we have the great idea, and wouldn't it be really boss if I had some lightning bolt sideburns?
I had this throat beard for 9 months. 9 months of my life that I will never get back. And I learned one valuable thing from this terrible mistake. Drunk dude bros love throat beards, and I don't care much for drunk dude bros.
But the jokes aside, there really is a point there, you know? It is, one of the common things we always hear coming back is that it is very difficult. It's very intimidating to just go out to a mailing list, shoot an email, and say, hey, I'd like to get involved. What can I do? It can be the scary thing, especially when you don't have faces to put to a lot of names. But again, why we're here is don't worry about it. We've all been there. All of us have gone through this process and really had to learn our way to how to contribute into the project. And it will be a process for you. It will be some learning to get involved. But we really want to help and encourage you to say, if you're interested and you want to do it, please get in touch with us. It's great. We always need users to get involved because those are the types of people who keep us honest as developers.
So for example, right now, the big discussions that are starting, and this is largely on the developer list, are around our next major breaking set of changes, because that's what you got to do. You got to breaking changes. But we're doing it for a good reason. So we're adopting as a community formal standards of what it will mean when we have version releases, what kind of compatibility guarantees we'll give so that people can build more robust software on top of us. Like, to date, that guarantee has only been a set of packages in a Java API somewhere. And so now we're trying to figure out, well, what do we actually want to promise people in terms of people who build on top of the shell, or people who rely on data files, or people who rely on any number of the 1,000 painful points where you could get cut while trying to do integration. And without you participating in that discussion, we're going to end up with essentially what developers want to do to minimize risk. Also, we're trying to figure out what our client API should look like. Like we still integrate in Java the same way we did, essentially, more or less, several years ago. And that's shown some weak points several times, particularly around lifecycle management. And again, you as users of those client APIs are the best source of authority on what they ought to look like.
The other thing to keep in mind, I imagine a lot of you are technical folks, but there are those who have transitioned more into management roles. Contributions are not always in the form of some patch which has Java code. The important thing to keep in mind is that there are a lot of things that make up this project, that make up this community. While some of them are technical, and for those who like to do technical, that's what they would call the fun stuff. But there is a lot of other aspects where we have, public-facing documentation, website. All this stuff has to be managed by the community, and all of this stuff can be contributed back by anyone. So again, it's the things that don't make sense out there. We have some spelling error in the website. I would happily accept a patch that fixes some grammatical error. Don't think that just because it's not a patch of some Java code or it's not the best thing you've ever written, don't think there isn't merit to it. It's very important. And the other thing to keep in mind is that we're always very appreciative of you giving us this code and these contributions, but the fact that maybe you go away for a couple months and you say, well, I got tied up in some other project at work, I'm not don't have much free time in the evening, something like that. Another of these core tenets of the Software Foundation is that your merit of what you receive from the project of contributing, that doesn't go away. It's not this, oh, well, you haven't been active for a few months, you don't count anymore, I think. That's not how it works. Once you contribute some code and you've sort of shown that you can follow the sort of guidelines that we set forth, that doesn't expire. So.
Yeah, so if you're a committer or a previous contributor and it's been a while, it'd be nice. You could come back. We can show you around. The code base has changed a lot, actually, but we can help each other through, despite whatever our differences may be. That's a boxer puppy and a kitten. They are almost the most adorable thing I could find on the internet, but not quite. Sadly, keynotes don't have question periods, I've been told. And so if you have questions, we'd encourage you to go to the user list or the dev list or contact Josh or I directly, or we'll be at booths outside these doors most of the day. Please reach out. And thank you very much for your time. I hope you are awake now enough for the next keynote. Thank you.